G'day painters, welcome back to Mars Miniatures. Today I'm back to my Thousand Suns and working on a Rhino. Let's get to it. Now if there's one thing that everyone that paints Thousand Suns thinks, it's that we need more trim to paint, because there's nowhere near enough trim to paint on a Thousand Suns army. So I decided to add trim to my Rhino. The first step was to mark where I wanted the trim with a whiteboard marker. I figured this would be easier than working it out on the fly when I'm trying to glue things to it. Once I was happy with where I had marked out the trim, I started working on the trim. To make the trim, I thought about using plasticard, but decided it'd be too hard to keep it all the same width. So I spent ages looking around for another idea to use and settled on zip ties. They're cheap, they're all the same size, and I thought being plastic they'd work with plastic glue. They didn't, but I started with plastic glue and ended up swapping to super glue. I'd lay the zip tie on the model, then use my hobby knife to score where I wanted the cut. Then cut it on my cutting board and glue it on. It got a bit tricky in some spots where I needed angled cuts, but with some trial and error I'd get the cuts right, mostly. The biggest problem I had was the glue. Plastic glue ended up not working. Super glue worked, but it'd stick so quickly I'd had very little working time to get the parts positioned right. I've actually started working on a Predator recently and I'm using a 2-part epoxy instead, and that's working much better. I'm not recording that one, but once I get the issues ironed out, I might make another video showing it. This was my first attempt, so there were issues. Once I'd had all the trim that I'd marked out on, I wanted to fancy it up a little bit, so I used the ends of the zip ties for some decoration on the smokestacks, and I also cut some triangles to sprinkle around just to add a little bit more flair. Unfortunately, I lost a chunk of footage in the middle of doing all this, so I have no idea how long it actually took. If I do an updated version down the road, hopefully I'll be able to give it actual time. Once that was finally done, it was time to get painting. As always, I started by priming it, then giving it a coat of Diabolic Plum through my airbrush. Then my first step was the gold, using Retributor Armour. Normally I would have probably started with other colours first, but I was just keen to see how the trim would look painted up, so that's what I did first. And honestly, once the trim was painted, I was pretty happy with how it was looking, and that got me excited to get the rest of it painted. Next, using Ancient Stone, I blocked in the cream parts. This took multiple layers to get a good coat. Looking back, I should have used a pink first to give a better colour build up from. It would have taken less layers. Honestly, it's been months since I've really painted due to various life issues, so things like that have slipped my mind, and I need to start thinking about them again. But it's fine, just meant more layers of Ancient Stone. Then I did the tracks in black. Just break out a big beat up old brush for this. The details on the tracks can be a pain to get into without messing up the brush a bit, so an old beat up one is perfect. You can probably leave this step till much later. There's no reason to do it this early, and the tracks get handled a lot, so it'll need touch ups later anyway. Then I broke out gunmetal to do the metal parts. This was the wheels for the tracks, the top of the smokestacks, and some of the gizmos on top. And the gun bracket. The gun itself I did in death metal. I also did the structure around the spotter guy with this. I had to go back in with Retributor Armour to get a few spots I missed on the spotter guy, and to add some trim to the gun. This is one of the reasons it's probably better to have left the gold till after the rest of the colours, but oh well. Then back to gunmetal to do some more of the details on the guns. Painting order matters. It's something you should probably think about, and honestly something I normally consider, but I'm out of practice and need to get back into thinking about these things before I start the project. Time to work on the lights. I block them all in with white first, and do the spotter's eyes too. Then breaking out some contrast for the lights and eyes. The eyes and one set of the smaller lights get hit with warp lightning, the other set of small lights gets hit with Baal Red, and the larger lights with Iyanden yellow? I don't know how to pronounce that, it'll be on the screen. Then back to gunmetal to hit the metal parts of the big lights. Once again, painting order. At least using a wet palette means the paints are still there for me. For the missiles on the gun, I hit them with Dragon Red. Really, you could do these any colour, but red is a secondary colour for my army, and it lets me pretend they're Acme rockets, so it works well. And since I'm working on red, it's that time where I ask you to subscribe and turn that subscribe button red. While you're there, why not hit the like button too? It really helps the channel, and I appreciate every like. Time for the part you can skip if you're neater than me. Touch-ups. I put all the colours on my palette and just work around the model, touching up mistakes and parts where the airbrushing was a bit too light. I've spoken about this step before, but I find that being a bit messier when I'm blocking everything in and then coming back to touch everything up works better for me than trying to make no mistakes. But you may rather just try to avoid all mistakes while blocking everything in and avoid this step. It's really a personal opinion thing, and you'll find what works best for you. Next, I cheated a little bit and used black panel liner to hit some of the vents and that sort of thing. You could definitely paint these with a normal black, I was just being lazy, and it worked well. Then I broke out purple tone to do some shading. I'm not going to use this all over the model, I don't like shades on big flat surfaces, but the spotter and specific spots where I want shadows, like the smokestacks, get hit with a wash to build them up a bit. With dark tone I hit a lot more. All the gunmetal parts got hit with this, along with some of the gold parts. One thing to note here is that due to the gaps on the trim where I messed up a bit, I didn't want to hit them with the shade, as it'll make the gaps much more obvious. Like, to the point where you'll see them easily from tabletop. At the moment, you don't really notice them when it's sitting on the table, and it's only when you pick it up that you notice those gaps, so I didn't want to make them more obvious. Finally, it's time to start highlighting. I start with Magecast Magenta for the purple parts. On the sides, I work up from roughly somewhere between a third and a half of the way down the model, pulling it towards the top. Then on the top I hit any parts that wouldn't be in shadow due to the guns and that sort of thing, leaving a little bit of space from the trim or other parts that might be casting a shadow. I really struggle with highlighting square vehicles like this. The more rounded Votan vehicles I've painted previously are much easier, because you just follow the curves. But that's okay, it looks good once it's finished. This does take a few layers. I'm doing thin layers to avoid any build up of annoying texture. It's better to do multiple thin layers and build it up than risk creating texture. But then I created some minor texture anyway. Then Warlock Magenta next, working within the previous step. So on the sides I'm only doing down maybe a quarter of the way down, probably a little bit less. And on the top I'm doing most of the same as the previous step, just leaving a bit more room around the parts that could be creating shadows. But since the top is flat, the majority of it gets hit with this. Once again, take it slow, do multiple thin layers. With Spellbound Fuchsia, I do edge highlights on any edges that are facing upwards. Important spots to make sure you don't miss are like the top edges on the gaps in the smokestacks and the vents around the model. I actually think it might have been better to go a step lighter with the edge highlight, up to Enchanted Pink instead maybe, and I'll probably try that on my next vehicle, but it's something you can try and decide for yourself. Time to work on the creams, and the first highlight colour is Boney Spikes. Again, I found this tricky and I'm not sure I got the highlights right. Highlights on square things are weird. But I focused on the parts that are facing upwards, and on the side parts I focused towards the middle of the sections and towards the bottom, because the top part would be in the shadow from the overhang. Then with pale sand I worked on the same locations, just in smaller areas, and once again focusing on the parts facing upwards. For the edge highlights for the cream parts I went with white. The pale sand from the previous step is already very light, and there isn't really another colour between that and white that'll actually have an impact, so white it is. Then pure red for the tops and tips of the missiles. Next I break out bright gold for the highlights on the gold. Same as the other steps, I'm focusing on the parts facing upwards and on the sides, working from around a third of the way up, and the top edges of the trim. To finish the highlights on the gold and to do the highlights on the gunmetal, I use Mithril. Then I use gunmetal to highlight the death metal parts, hitting the tops and the edges. And the final step is hitting all the rivets. I went back and forth on whether I should do them silver or gold. In the end I settled on gold, but you could easily do them silver too. I chose gold purely because I think it suits my army better. There's a lot of gold on my Thousand Suns, and in comparison the Rhino has a lot less, so it's an easy way to get a little bit more on the model. And we're finished, just under 6.5 hours of painting. If I had to guess, the trim took between an hour and a half and 2 hours, so including the trim it would have been less than 9 hours, which I don't think is too bad. I think I would definitely save time on trim as I get the technique down, and there are a number of spots I could have saved time on the painting by going in the right paint order and things like that. But really, even if it was 9 hours total, I think that's not bad for a large model for your army. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how it looks. There are definitely problems with the trim that I'm working on fixing in future projects, but for the first attempt I think it's good. I also didn't manage to totally avoid creating texture on top of the Rhino, but that's a practice thing. I am rusty and out of practice. I'm sure you guys will be more careful and avoid that. In the end, it's a good addition to my army and looks fantastic on the table, and that's the important thing. If you've made it this far, then surely you've enjoyed the video, so why not give it a like? And if you're not subscribed and want to see more from me, then hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching, catch you in the next video.